Hi, my name's Alex Dolphin, and welcome back to another episode of Ex Ante. Today we're going to discuss Samuel Bankman-Fried, his crypto exchange FTX, his hedge fund Alameda, its subsequent implosion. We're going to focus on the Department of Justice's indictment, its criminal indictment that it filed against Samuel Bankman-Fried here in December. And we're going to also discuss briefly the SEC's civil complaint that was also filed against Samuel Bankman-Fried. So first, let's just start with a quick chronology of what happened here, what occurred with FTX and Alameda, Samuel Bankman-Fried. If you already know, just feel free to skip ahead to get to the legal analysis of the indictment and the SEC complaint. But for those of you that aren't inundated in Twitter and financial news, this might be a little bit helpful in understanding what's going on. So SBF founded FTX, it's a crypto exchange. He also created a hedge fund, a crypto hedge fund called Alameda Research. Alameda Research basically tried to use quantitative methods to make lots of money trading crypto. And it was successful for a little while, but eventually it wasn't very successful. And the downturn of Alameda occurred in May of 2022 when the crypto markets downturned generally. Alameda was trading on margin, meaning that using leverage, basically loans, it was able to trade much higher amounts than it actually had. And it lost a lot of money when Terra collapsed, when Luna collapsed, when Three Arrows Capital collapsed. Two of those are cryptocurrencies. One of them was another crypto hedge fund that Alameda had exposure to. So Alameda lost a lot of money. It lost a lot of money in part when it was trading on FTX. So Sam Bankman-Fried's hedge fund was trading on his crypto exchange. When you're trading on margin, generally what you have to put up some collateral. And if the value of that collateral goes down drastically, you're going to get auto-liquidated. Now, exchanges would do this because they want to limit their exposure. They don't want people to have negative balances. If you have a negative balance, then it's going to be really hard to collect on that if you're an exchange. So what you do is you liquidate before you have a negative balance. Well, FTX, because it's friendly with Alameda, didn't have auto liquidation. Alameda was the only customer exempt from this. So it was allowed to trade on margin, which allowed it to, get higher upside, but also much lower downside. And it accrued a significant negative balance. And then in an attempt to, keep Alameda solvent, to pay lenders, FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried continued to shovel more and more money from FTX, the crypto exchange, into Alameda. So when I mean money from FTX, we mean money that customers literally deposited on the crypto exchange. So retail customers that are interested in crypto give FTX $100. That $100 then got siphoned to Alameda. Once that money was in Alameda, Sam Bankman-Fried essentially stood on both sides of loans, loaned himself $1.8 billion, loaned some of his cronies upwards of $800 million, and took that money for themselves. Sam Bankman-Fried used that money to perpetuate his effective altruism throughout society, which was basically, if you rob money, if you steal money, it's okay as long as you're doing good. That was his philosophy. You can see some downfalls in maybe effective altruism, or utilitarianism taken to the max. That's another discussion. But this money was spent on political donations ahead of the 22 election, both to Democrats and conservatives. It's pretty clear that he was dumping a lot of money there. He was very friendly with the regulators, trying to get crypto regulation in full force and favorable for him. And then, what happened? Well, crypto news company basically looked into Alameda's balance sheet, saw that it was having these problems where customer funds were going back and forth. FTX's exchange token had a large position, which was basically valueless, magic beans that came out of nowhere. You get really deep into what was going on, but essentially all you need to know is the funds were commingled. People saw this. A founder of another crypto exchange, CZ, he had a lot of the FTX's exchange tokens, FTT. He tried to dump those because he saw the problem. That caused a sharp decrease in FTX's exchange token, caused loss of faith by the customers at FTX and rapid withdrawals. FTX didn't have enough money because it had given it all to Alameda and to Sam Bankman-Fried, his friends, Bahama apartments, had given all that money away. So the customers, FTX was insolvent. It couldn't give the customers back the funds that it had deposited. So even if a customer said it had a balance of $15,000 in its FTX account, well, that wasn't there. It was gone. And so FTX and Alameda, the whole blanket of companies, filed for bankruptcy protection. That's where we're at right now. It was interesting. About a month after this, happened, there was no criminal charges filed. Sam was wandering in the Bahamas. He was tweeting actively, basically saying that he had a lot of regrets about his failure to manage risk. He was also jumping into like Twitter Spaces, having interviews with the New York Times, very loud in the wake of this implosion. And so about a month after that, he was set to testify for Congress. The Department of Justice filed a criminal indictment. And that's what we'll just jump into right here. So what does this mean? So it's a criminal indictment, which means that Sam Bankman-Fried could go to federal prison for a really long time. It means that under these criminal charges, he could be subject to forfeiture, so lose all of the money that he has any access to. So this is really the meat. We'll talk about the SEC later. I'm a little bit cynical on that, but this DOJ indictment authorized by the grand jury, this is the meat. First count is conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Wire fraud is essentially just using interstate commerce, interstate wires, emails, communications to perpetuate fraud. It's called wire because it was enacted in the 50s. So you think about like bank wires, you think about telephone wires, any way that you're using interstate systems to perpetuate fraud. Now, the reason interstate is important is because we got to go back to the Constitution. This is a federal criminal law. And so Congress has to have the authority to enact federal criminal laws. And if it's impacting interstate commerce, there you go. The federal government has jurisdiction to enact criminal laws there. The court has so held. And so, yes, we have wire fraud on the customers. So there's a conspiracy charge, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. And the four elements of wire fraud, I think, are just worth going on. We'll talk about Sam's future defense at trial. Or during the plea negotiations. Defendant voluntarily and intentionally devised or participated in a scheme to defraud another out of money. Defendant did so with the intent to fraud. It was reasonably foreseeable that interstate wire communications would be used, and interstate wire communications were in fact used. So this is important because when you think about how is Sam going to create his defense, and you can already kind of see what he's been doing in the public sphere. It's just failure to manage risk. Like, I just got too caught up in doing other things at FTX, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I wasn't managing risk, right? So he's not a stupid guy, as much as he'd like to, kind of look like that. He's not. He's very smart. Both of his parents are Stanford law professors. They're both very smart. Everyone's connected to high-level attorneys. And so in the past 30 days, it might be looking like he was stupid, and there's certainly some things that he said in the public that were probably not the smartest. But it's clear that the defense that he's beginning to put forth is, I didn't have the intent to defraud anyone. I just lacked some risk management. This isn't a bank. I didn't have the same, obligations to customers as it were if it were a bank. I'm not a U.S. bank. I'm in the Bahamas. So I didn't intend to do anything. It just all got out of control, and I lost sight of what was going on. You can see that's what his defense is going to be. He's already begun it. So you also have a conspiracy to commit wire fraud on the lenders, and then wire fraud on lenders. So those are 1, 2, 3, 4 of the counts. Count 5 is conspiracy to commit commodities fraud. The commodities that FTX was issuing were future contracts, spot contracts, any type of derivative on a cryptocurrency would be a commodity. Conspiracy to commit securities fraud. See, this is also hit on in the SEC's complaint, but essentially saying that, it was securities fraud when you sold equity to the equity investors in FTX. And so, we're going to pile that on too. Conspiracy to commit money laundering, essentially saying that you got this unlawful money. You stole this money from the customers. You loaned it to your hedge fund, and you loaned it to yourself. And then you had laundered that through the systems to try and disguise the source of the funds. You're trying to disguise the ill-gotten gains, the unlawful money. You're just trying to launder it. And then count 8 is interesting. a conspiracy to defraud the United States of America and violate campaign finance laws. So this comes back to where he was using that money to donate into the 2022 election, the money that he stole from people. Basically, he violated the FEC's, the Federal Election Commission's regulations, and the federal campaign finance laws when he was not donating this money in the proper way, basically going over thresholds, donating in dark ways. And so that's the 8th count of the indictment. I think it's interesting. You notice that there are wire fraud charges, and then there are conspiracy to commit wire fraud charges. And you think, as the DOJ, why would you charge conspiracy here? Well, one, there's double jeopardy concerns. You want to make sure that you throw everything here so that future charges aren't barred by double jeopardy if things go wrong. 2, you're going to charge as much as you can to get plea leverage against Sam Bankman-Fried. I mean, this is going to be quite the trial when you think about how his parents are connected to lawyers, when you think about basically, we don't know where money is, we don't know who's going to fund him. This could be quite the trial. And then 3rd, so as a prosecutor, you want to get as much plea leverage as you can. And then 3rd, it's interesting to charge conspiracy. Basically, when you think about Sam's intent defense, there's this thing called the Pinkerton Doctrine. I have a video on it if you're interested. But essentially, when you're in a conspiracy, you can be vicariously liable for the other conspirators' acts, even if you didn't do it yourself, as long as it was within the scope of the conspiracy and reasonably foreseeable. So if Sam tries to say, well, it wasn't really me. I was out doing effective altruism. It was, Caroline and the other founders of FTX were the ones that were doing this. I really, I didn't intend to do any of this stuff. And that's, like we see, that's his defense that's incoming. Well, you might not be able to get him on wire fraud, but if you can prove that there's agreement or meeting between the minds of these founders to do this, and the transfer of consumers' funds to FTX, from FTX to Alameda and to these people, then you might be able to get him on the conspiracy charges. And so the conspiracy is there for leverage, but also just in the case that he's able to get off on the substantive offenses, you'll be able to get him on the conspiracy. And then, so for a sentence, I hope you like prison food, Sam, because potentially 115 years in the federal pen. The federal sentencing guidelines are not kind to people like Sam. The fraud loss table, essentially, if you still over 550 million, you're in the highest category in the sentencing guidelines, which ratchets up that sentence. There's also the First Step Act that was passed by Trump that shows that, because this is Sam's first criminal offense, he could get out early if he had good behavior in prison. Even that would, he's not going to be out for a long time if he's convicted of all these counts or even just some of them. So where do we go from here on the criminal charges? Well, Sam was denied bail in the Bahamas. The Bahamian judge basically said this guy's just too much of a flight risk. He has too much money. He has private access to private jets. He's probably going to try and run away before he's extradited to the United States. So we're going to keep him held here. He's currently in Fox Hill Prison in the Bahamas, which is one of the most notorious, terrible prisons in the world. And that's probably where Sam is going to be spending Christmas this year, not with his family and friends in a Bahamas penthouse that was purchased with money that he probably almost certainly stole. So that's the criminal world. And this could be a long process, well over a year before we see a trial, before we see a plea deal potentially, before we see sentencing. Of course, Sam has speedy trial rights under the Constitution, under the Speedy Trial Act, but there's a lot of exemptions for that. And if his defense attorneys are filing a lot of motions to try and exclude evidence, pretrial motions, then that clock gets extended. So we are just beginning a very long criminal process here. So the SEC's complaint, these are civil charges against Sam, and they're seeking civil remedies. What that means is nothing that the SEC is going to do here could put Sam behind bars or in a federal prison. Rather, it could force him to pay money to the SEC, pay fines, or bar him from selling future securities generally. So this the SEC focuses on the equity investors in FTX. So these are not the customers. These are not the people that deposited $10, $15, $5,000, $500 into FTX and bought crypto. No, these are the venture capital funds that dumped millions, hundreds of millions, and billions of dollars into FTX. So think about like Sequoia, about Insight Venture Partners. There's plenty of others. If you go look on Crunchbase, very heralded, respected venture firms that dumped a lot of money into FTX and bought securities. So they bought stock, equity in FTX. They didn't buy any cryptocurrency. They had equity just like you would in any other company in FTX. Now, FTX was a private company, but there still can be securities violations if you make material untrue statements when you're selling those securities, even to private investors. And so that's what the SEC's complaint is focused on. It's violations of the 1933 and the 34 acts and securities fraud generally. The SEC's complaint, if you're interested, I encourage you to read it. It goes step by step, basically through what Sam was doing in the lead up to this collapse of FTX, how he had labeled accounts, how they had circumvented accounting regulations, how they had basically told the equity investors that they had great risk management, great risk controls, when in fact they had none. And focusing on, it's hard to say you feel bad for the venture firms that lost money here, but they have a lot of money. You don't feel as bad for the venture firms as you do for the person that put $5,000 or $10,000 in it, of course. But these venture firms were still lied to. These people that were attempting to do due diligence. The SEC complaint makes out saying that Sam said, we have great risk controls, we have great risk management, we don't have exposure to any illiquid tokens, when in fact all of that was a lie. So the SEC complaint is a little interesting. If I think about it from a cynical perspective, I almost think about it as a power grab by Gary Gensler and the SEC that's very hungry to exert control and dominance over cryptocurrency as an industry. And it seems like it's a surefire way to win, right? Because we're not actually talking about any cryptocurrency in the SEC complaint. We're talking about equity investments in FTX, which is very much within the SEC's realm. Not talking about cryptocurrency, but the public image is that the SEC is going after cryptocurrency and kind of staking its turf in a war there between it and the CFTC and Congress for perhaps another future regulator that's just going to be over cryptocurrency. And you got to think about like the effect here. If Sam is going to be in federal prison because he's guilty on the DOJ indictment, he's found guilty by a jury. Or in a plea deal, Well, what effect does this really have? Like, okay, he can't sell securities again. Well, he's not going to sell securities from prison either. And like, what is the SEC really going to collect fines from FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried when that money should probably go to the customers, the retail consumers that lost $5,000, $10,000? Does the SEC really want to be the person that's taking money from the customers just to fill its coffers for fines? Probably not. And so that's why I would just be a little bit more cynical of the SEC's complaint here, is because it's like, what is the effect really of this, except for maybe to stake out turf in a cryptocurrency regulation battle. Anyways, thanks so much for watching this video. I know it was a long one. If you stuck with me all the way, I'd love to have you as a subscriber. If you'd like to see more of these videos where we discuss legal topics, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.